Okay, so just imagine this for a second. You finally won your independence, and now you have to write one single rule book for hundreds of millions of people. I mean, people who speak totally different languages, who follow different faiths, all living across this huge ancient land. That was the unbelievable challenge facing India. So let's dive into how they actually pulled it off.
But before we get into all the history and politics, let's make it simple. How do you stop a bully? Seriously, think about it. Maybe you had an older brother, right? And he just made up all the rules. He always got the TV remote. He always got the last cookie. He was always batting first. His rules, his game. So, what do?
Yeah, you can whine and complain for sure, but the only way to really fix it, the only solution, is to change the whole system. You've got to go to the parents, the higher authority, and say, look, we need a written rule book, a book that applies to everybody, including Big Bro, one that spells out exactly what he can and can't do and what your rights are too. It's the only way to make things fair.
And that simple idea, right there, perfectly explains this huge concept, the rule of law. A constitution is just a nation's ultimate rule book. It might be one of humanity's greatest inventions because it's all about accountability. It makes sure that no one, not the richest, not the most powerful, not even the government itself, is above the law. Everybody plays by the same rules.
Now, for India, this demand for their own rule book wasn't something that just popped up overnight. Oh no, it was a long, slow, and honestly, a pretty frustrating struggle that went on for decades. The very idea that Indians could write their own destiny had to be fought for, inch by painful inch.
And this timeline really shows you just how slow that fight was. The first little whisper of an assembly to write a constitution came from M.N. Roy way back in 1934. A year later, it becomes the official demand of the Indian National Congress. But it took more than 10 years of offers, rejections, and negotiations before the British finally said yes in 1946. It was a real grind.
So, what was the big holdup? Well, it basically boiled down to this one fundamental conflict. India was demanding a totally sovereign assembly for a completely free and independent nation. Simple as that. But the British offers, like the famous Cripps Mission in 1942, they were offering something less, dominion status, which even came with the scary idea that parts of India could just opt out. So of course these offers got rejected. They just didn't go far enough.
So by 1946, the green light is on. A Constituent Assembly is going to happen, but that just raised an even bigger, more complicated question. Who exactly is going to write the rules? In a country with that much mind-boggling diversity, how on earth do you put together a group of people that can actually represent everyone?
Well, the answer started with this number, 389. That was the total number of seats in the Constituent Assembly. I mean, it was a massive body for a massive job, with every single seat representing about 1 million people.
And those 389 seats were split into two big buckets. You had 296 seats for what was called British India, the provinces directly run by the British. And then you had 93 seats set aside for the princely states, the territories that were still run by local kings and princes.
Now, when they held elections for those British India seats, the results really painted a clear picture of the political scene. The Indian National Congress won a huge majority with 208 seats, but the Muslim League was also a major player with 73 seats. So right away, you knew there were going to be some very different points of view in that room.
All this created this really unique kind of a hybrid assembly. It wasn't directly elected by every single person. That was just impossible back then. Instead, some members were elected by their provincial governments, and others were just nominated by the rulers of the princely states. But even with this indirect system, the end result was an assembly that was amazingly representative, with people from literally every major community.
Okay, so the assembly is formed. The who is settled. Now the real work could begin. But before they could even think about writing the first rule, they had to agree on a vision. What kind of country was India actually going to become? What were the big ideas, the core principles that would guide every single decision they made?
On December 13, 1946, Jawaharlal Nehru stood up in front of everyone and presented what became known as the Objectives Resolution. This quote from it really says it all. The mission was to declare India an independent, sovereign republic, and to create a constitution for its future. That was it. That was their North Star, their guiding purpose.
And that resolution laid out this incredibly powerful set of promises. We're not just talking about political freedom, we're talking about justice in all its forms. Social and economic justice, too. Equality, not just on paper, but equality of status and opportunity. And huge freedoms of thought, expression, and belief. And, maybe most importantly, a direct promise to protect minorities and other disadvantaged groups. This was the soul of the new India, being written down for the very first time.
Look, having a beautiful vision is one thing, but turning all that soaring poetry into a precise, functional, 395-article legal document, that is a whole other level of hard. This was the absolutely gigantic task of drafting, the real intellectual heavy lifting of the entire project. So, to lead this massive effort, the Assembly created a special drafting committee, and its chairman was the brilliant legal mind, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He and his committee were the chief architects, the ones who had to take all these grand ideas and forge them into an actual blueprint for the nation.
And the way they did it was just so meticulous and, well, democratic. They'd prepare a first draft, but then they'd release it to the public, to newspapers, to citizens, for 8 entire months, asking for feedback and suggestions. Only after all that input did the Assembly start debating it, word by word, clause by clause. This wasn't a document made in some secret room. It was forged out in the open, in the fire of public debate. So after years, literally years, of debate, disagreement, redrafting, and compromise, the moment of creation was finally here. That long, long journey from just a simple idea to a nation's soul written on paper was about to hit its grand finale. The final amount of time they spent on it is just staggering. 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days. That's not just a piece of trivia. It represents thousands of hours of debate, endless research, and this just unshakable dedication to building a nation from the ground up.
And on this day, November 26, 1949, the job was done. The President of the Assembly put the final Constitution to a vote, and it passed. The Constitution of India was formally adopted. It was this incredible moment where Indians, for the very first time in their modern history, gave to themselves their own supreme law.
But wait a second. If they adopted it in November, then why is India's Republic Day on January 26th? Good question. The answer goes back to this term, Purna Swaraj, which means complete independence. See, 20 years earlier, on January 26, 1930, the freedom fighters had declared that day as their symbolic Independence Day.
And so to honor that historic pledge, the Assembly decided to wait just a couple of months. On January 26, 1950, the Constitution was officially brought into force. India stopped being a British dominion and was reborn as a fully sovereign republic with an Indian president. The promise of Purna Swaraj was finally truly real.
So, in the end, you see, the making of India's constitution wasn't just about lawyers writing laws. It was about a generation of leaders making a promise of justice, of liberty, and of equality for what was then a sixth of all humanity. Which really leaves us with a big question for today, doesn't it? How does a single document, now over 70 years old, continue to shape the destiny of one of the most complex and ancient civilizations on Earth? That, right there, is the enduring power and the constant challenge of India's great rulebook.